Good evening, everyone. I've got a bit of feedback. Any member or officer in physical attendance with an electronic device should mute it to avoid feedback. Any remote participant, please keep your camera and microphone off unless you wish to speak, and ideally do not use the camera facilities at all, as this can affect the quality of the IT connection. The meeting may be recorded, and data collection during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use their Swale Borough Council or KCC laptop to participate virtually. If you join using the link on the website or on a mobile and tablet device, it may not be always possible to identify you. You may not be recorded as remote attendance. Could I ask members to speak loudly and clearly into their microphones and to switch off their microphones after speaking? Otherwise, the remote participant may be unable to hear the next speaker. Welcome members, officers and any members of the public to the Audit Committee meeting. The following staff are in attendance, either in the chamber or remotely. Director of Resources, Lisa Fillery. Head of Audit Partnership, Catherine Woodward. Head of Finance and Procurement, Claire Sandbury. Key Audit Partner, Grant Fulton, Matt Dean. Democratic Services, alone, how do you pronounce that? Thank you, what you said. Democratic Services, Philippa Davies. Are there any other officers in attendance? No? Are members aware of the emergency evacuation procedure? There is no planned evacuation if the alarm sounds. Those in attendance should leave via the exits indicated and assemble outside where directed. If there's anyone in attendance with mobility issues, please indicate now. No, it's a fit lot here. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Andy Booth, who is substituted by Councillor Peter Marchington, from Councillor Richard Palmer, from Councillor Mike Henderson, who is substituted by Councillor Charles Gibson, from Councillor Rich Lehman, and from Councillor Simon Clark, the Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Do members take the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of January 2024, minutes numbers 566 to 573, and the minutes of the extraordinary meeting held on the 19th of February 2024, minutes numbers 647, 649 as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you, everyone. I will sign them later. I invite the item 5, Internal Audit and Assurance Plan 2024-25. I invite the officer to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, agenda item 5 of your packs is the Internal Audit and Assurance Plan for 24-25. This report has 3 recommendations. The first is to approve the plan, the second is to note the resource requirement, and the third is to note that the plan is compiled independently without undue influence from management. So the purpose of this report and of the Internal Audit and Assurance Plan is to provide adequate coverage of audit to deliver an annual audit opinion at the end of the year. The public sector internal audit standards that govern how we operate state that audit planning is built upon risk assessments, so both internal and external risk assessments are considered. Page 10 of the report details those external risks that influence the audit plan and are drawn from sources such as SIPFA and the Institute of Internal Auditors. Page 11 details internal factors, risk factors that we consider as part of the operational risks, including more obvious risks such as financial and fraud risks to more obscure risks around change and complexity. So when we compile the audit plan, we assess these risks along with assessing other factors such as corporate priorities, previous results, the time since the last audit review, and also through organisational knowledge and discussions with relevant officers that all feed into producing this audit plan. Page 12 details the resources required to deliver the optimal amount of audit days to deliver this plan, which allow me to deliver the annual audit opinion next spring. Page 13 details how we deliver the audit plan and also the themes that each audit is categorised under. And page 14 details the actual audits that we intend to deliver next financial year. You'll see that there are audits covering financial systems, organisational governance, council infrastructure, operational audits, and audits covering our human capital as well. You'll see that this coverage is quite broad, which is what is required to deliver a balanced opinion on the organisation at the end of the year. I'm happy to take questions from any members if anybody has any.
Councillor Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. It was on the page, I think you said page 10. I had marked up the global and sector risks, cyber security and digital disruption. I'm going to touch wood, and you just think, well, if I say something, is it our turn next anyway? There have been an awful lot of attacks on local government. Some have taken up to 2 years to repair, and increasingly on those organisations which our public rely on. And it's all very well saying, oh, we're giving you 2 years free membership of Experian, so you can check whether anyone's taken out a mortgage in your name or this, that and the other. And I just, that's too late, love. So I suppose, say without sort of inviting problems, how satisfied are we that we're more secure than, you know, the dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen local authorities that have so far had these attacks? Thanks.
So cybersecurity, I mean, it's a really important topic that you touch on there. It is possibly the most current and evolving risk anywhere within the public sector. And when I say evolving, that is a sort of daily basis with the way that cyber criminals can infiltrate our systems. We are currently doing an audit at the moment, which is due to be finished in the next week or two. Our IT team have recently appointed a cybersecurity officer as well, which is, you know, it's music to everybody's ears. And they have 6 monthly stroke annual reviews as well from other cyber regulators, so experts within the field, to make sure that we are current. And a lot of the reviews that we in internal audit do are reviewing the processes that are already in place and making sure that they're keeping on top of those action plans so that we are keeping as current and up to date as possible. I think we're all aware that it is possibly one of our biggest risks, so it is something that is highly involved, and we do keep quite a close eye on that risk.
Before Lisa comes in, Chair, if I could follow up, one of the latest ones that some of my elderly residents have reported, I'm not going to advertise the company. It's the water company that looks after the island. A lot of young people, to be fair, but a lot of older people do direct debits. Doesn't Swellborough Council encourage this? They do direct debits because it's a lot easier for them. I also happen to be with this water company. I don't do a direct debit, so I didn't get the letter saying, "Oh, sorry, love, we've had a security breach, and all your data's gone. But it's okay, 2 years free Experian membership." For older people, indeed for younger people, but especially older people, it's extremely worrying. And I know some of my elderly residents are looking to come away from the old direct debit. And it's very sad that you try and put things in place to help them. As I know it's cash flow for us, but we're trying to encourage everyone onto direct debits. We don't want to be caught in the, well, no, that they had one, so I'm not going to bother with you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yes, what I was going to say, that our near neighbours that were subject to a recent cyber attack, we're hoping to learn from them. I think when they were attacked, as soon as it was discovered, all of our teams came in that weekend, and we were able to shut down some of the systems to make sure that we weren't infiltrated in the same way. But what we are asking at the Chief's level and at the Kent Finance Officer's level is if there are any lessons to be learned that we can share, because as Cathy said, it's evolving all the time, and they are really smart and better at it. And that's because they will throw all of their resources at it. So we are trying to keep on top of it as best we can, but I don't think we're ever going to be foolproof. Sainsbury's and Tesco's couldn't take credit card payments a couple of weekends ago. I don't think that was probably as a result of something like this. So it's a huge risk, but we can't just shut down our operations as a result. We just need to try and deal with it as best we can.
Thank you, Chair. One quick typo and a question. On page 14, the 2 bullet points, one's revs and bends, one's revs and bents. Presumably, we're not suggesting that that's what they are. But also in that section, I just wonder if I could have a bit more detail about what elections management disabled facilities grants is. Thank you.
So I think potentially what you've done is you've picked up 2 typos there. Disabled facilities grants should be on the bullet point underneath as a whole separate audit in entirety. So that is elections management is one whole audit on its own. Disabled facilities grants is another whole audit on its own. And I apologise for the typo. Unfortunately, when you put in words that do actually exist, it's very difficult to spot them as a typo.
Thank you. I've only just got one on the cyber security. We're finding foreign states, I won't name who they are starting to actually infiltrate local councils and that, and even try to interfere with our elections. Are we looking into that side of it and all?
It is something that we are aware of as an organisation, and our IT strategy will incorporate being able to look and foresee some of those possible infiltrations, breaches that may occur. I don't have the resource to be able to to go out hunting for a lot of these things. But obviously, and particularly with elections, one of the reasons we are doing the elections management audit is it is significantly overdue for us to do so. Our processes, generally speaking, are sound, and the controls we have in place. But these sorts of things are things that we do just need to be aware of. And as I said, some of the nature of our IT that's where our strengths are. And a lot of these things are to do with postal votes and things like that. And I think the Electoral Commission have changed some of those processes around postal voting as well to try and mitigate and minimise the disruption that could potentially be caused by anybody trying to mess with the system.
Thank you. Do I have a proposal to agree the recommendations? Councillor Harrison, seconder. Councillor Gibson. I'll say that again, didn't have my mic on. Item 6, Annual Risk Management Report. I invite the officer to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies, you've got me again. So the annual risk management report on page 17 of your agenda packs is an annual standard report that we bring to this committee. And the purpose of this report is to provide the Audit Committee with an annual update on the operation of the risk management framework. So this report provides an overview on how the risk management process has operated throughout the year. And to demonstrate the process in action, I have provided some information relating to the Council's risk profile, but it's important to note that this is actually monitored by the P&R Committee. So the Audit Committee approved a new risk management framework back in July 22. So this has been the first full year of the framework in action. The report actually details the roles and responsibilities, the risk management process itself, how that process played out in action during 23-24, and what risk management will look like in 24-25. So I'm not going to go into detail. I hope you've read the report, but if anybody's got any questions, then I'm happy to take those.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. I think you may have just answered this, but 1.3 it says 22-23. Does that mean 23-24, or does it? Are we running a year behind effectively?
It should actually say 22 all the way through to 24, so it's covering that 18-month period.
Understood.
Yes.
That was my assumption.
Yeah.
Just confirm. And then on page 24 and then 25, it's I suppose a question that is not to do with how we measure it, but about what we're doing to it, in that the risks are basically not changing. So are we doing anything active to mitigate these risks? 'Cause if we are, it doesn't look like it's working very well in that the things have not moved. Basically, there is no movement year on year. And then I suppose the follow-up question on page 25 is why have we deemed the risk of focus on priorities deemed to be getting worse? I mean, I think hopefully that's the obvious question, because if you give me a red, amber, green system, I think I should be asking the red question.
Okay, so I think, just let me know if I've misunderstood this. So in terms of what you can see on page 24, this is the risk profile. What I'm going to say is the unmitigated risks. So this is the point as to if we are doing nothing. So it's not getting worse, it's just that all of these risks are there. In theory, we've got more risks now than we had at this point last year that we are needing to mitigate. On page 26 of the report, what you can actually see there is how we're mitigating those risks. So it's still the same number of risks, but instead of having things in black, you'll see everything sort of moved down, diagonally down the chart. So with the actions that we're putting in place and mitigating those risks, we are making progress and things are. But some of those risks are never going to disappear. They're always going to be risks to us. And I think that's really important to note. Have I answered all of your questions?
So on 24, what is called focus on established priorities to
So in terms of this one, let me just get this right. The actual grid is a impact versus likelihood, and on this one the impact has increased, however the likelihood has reduced. I don't have the details to hand on that one, but I can provide you with a bit more information on that. And this was one of the points I was trying to make, that this is where P&R actually monitor those risks, and this committee is just about noting the process. But if you have an interest in that, I can certainly find the information out and share that with you. Okay.
Councillor Noor.
Thank you, Chairman. This is more of a comment than anything from someone relatively new to this. The report is very well laid out. It's very easy to view, informative. The visuals are excellent. But I find it's only informative to those who know what they're looking at. For the sake of transparency, on page 24 and 26, the block diagrams, I would actually like to see this a little bit more broken down. such as not necessarily to go into extensive detail, but for example, on the diagrams at the bottom left, there's a green one. I would like a little bit more information about where that number 1 is coming from, what we're talking about. Again, it doesn't need to go into a lot of detail, but a couple of examples or labels would help understand where this information is coming from. Thank you.
So I think some of that, I mean, obviously, if you are new to the committee, sometimes these diagrams can become a little bit overwhelming, and I totally understand that. The Appendix 2 on page 28 does give that breakdown of what the numbers mean, but you know, it's got a likelihood of 1, which means it's really rare, it's really unlikely to happen. It's got an impact of 5, that means it's catastrophic. But I totally take your point that from a visual perspective, we could potentially share some of that information on. And I think one thing that we did discuss is providing some additional training for this committee and the P&R committee as well, and any other councillors who feel it would be really relevant. And I think that's something that everybody would benefit from. There is quite a lot of detail within the actual risk management framework that was approved by this committee that may also be a useful starting point for anybody who wants to go back and have a read of that document too.
Councillor Harrison.
I was going to say that there are some here which, I mean, the temporary accommodation, homelessness, that is reported to the Housing and Health Committee every 6 months, so that all of those members are aware of exactly what is happening, because it comes under that committee. Even though all of this comes under P&R, it is very important that individual committees also have a handle on it. Apart from anything else, the more people that know, I think the better it is. Having said that, there was one occasion when we were in the cabinet system, not us, but when there was a cabinet system, and we had this before the Audit Committee, and we referred a matter back to the to the cabinet because we were unhappy with the impact and likelihood and risk profile, etc., of a particular project which they were working on. I think the chair of audit got changed very quickly after that, to be fair, but audit has that authority to say, no, actually, we're not happy about this. We're not happy that you've got a handle on it. So we can say things like that. But, as I say, to go back, I think it's important that all chairs of committees do look at these things, so that, you know, the more people that know about them and understand them, the better it is, surely. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Lisa.
Thank you. Yes, because under the cabinet system, the monitoring of the risk management risks, too many risks in that sentence, was also the responsibility of Audit Committee. So that element where you would have referred a specific risk back to cabinet, that role is now falls with policy and resources, and to some extent some of the service committees for the risks that are specific to them. So there is a slight change in responsibility, but it's the responsibility of this committee to make sure that the process is working as it should. I hadn't finished, sorry. And I was going to say, yes, the risk management training has been held previously for this committee, and when the responsibility changed for to policy and resources, we also held a training session with them, but acknowledging that a lot of memberships of those two committees have changed, we've discussed the need to refresh that, and we will deliver, as Kathy's already said, we will deliver a training session probably ahead of policy and resources, because the detail of risk is down to them to monitor, but all members will be invited, but especially Audit Committee, so we will get that on the schedule. Subjects, this could be subject to the member training working group agreeing that, because there is a training schedule that they are working on, so it might be that you would like to feed that to your representatives, because if it is really relevant for your roles on either this committee or policy and resources, then we need to get that bumped up the priority schedule, because we are working to what members want.
Thank you. I think it will be a very good idea to have refreshers. I've been on this committee 5 years, and like you, sometimes I have struggled to say, why is the arrow going that way? Why is, you know, and because we don't, it's not a committee that sits regular, it's, you know, and so I think it'd be a very good idea.
I mean, this is one of the committees where we do run a training session or a briefing session before each one, because membership of this committee, you are supposed to have the relevant training to be able to monitor the reports that come to you. So that is why we have run a rolling programme. And so I'll please encourage you to engage with your representatives on the Member Development Working Group, so that the training does get the priority that it needs.
Councillor Worcester.
I'm ever so sorry that I was running behind. I do apologise to everybody. And I just want to back that up by saying that we have had meetings of the Member Development Group, and it has been highlighted that there is a need for across-the-board training, and there's also a need for specific training from committees. And what would be really good is to strengthen that relationship between the members' training group and committee chairs, to make sure that, for instance, everything's being noted. So not only are we getting the training in, but we're actually recognising the good works of committees and sharing that best practice, so that if one committee on SWAL is doing something really good in its training model, we can then potentially roll that out for other committees as well. But the question I had against that, if that's okay, was very similar to Councillor No's question regarding how other people reading the report might see it. Because, for instance, at full council last night, we had a motion declaring a emergency for our housing. And actually, when you look at this report, you can see that that is following the lines of it's right up there for this report in the RAG rating. But, for instance, if we look at our climate and ecological emergency, that appears to fall further down the list, if you see what I mean. So it'd be really useful to have that sort of training to recognise why there is a difference, so that it can be explained to residents why on reports it's different from what, for instance, a conversation might be. Because obviously when people hear emergency, they're going to expect those two things to be of similar importance. Whether or not they fall within the same risk categories is a different conversation, isn't it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Worcester. Very good points there. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to leave it on. Councillor Worcester, thank you very much. Right. Right, all those in favour? Right, item 7, external audit plan. I invite the officer to introduce the report. Thank you.
So this is our external audit. Matt is covering this report, not one of the officers. Over to you, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Chair, bank members. So this is our annual audit plan, which sets out our timeline for our work in respect to the 23-24 financial year, which takes place over the rest of the 24 calendar year. I think for those of you who've been on a committee for several years, this will look somewhat familiar to what you've seen in the past, but I will just go through a few key areas for members. I think if we start with page 34 of the pack, this is, I guess, a helpful summary of the key areas of focus for us at this stage. The first column talks through our significant risks, which will be those that we've looked at in the previous years around management overrider control, risk of devaluation of land and building and investment properties, and around the net pensions liability. So those should all be familiar. There's a brief bit on there around our materiality calculation and how we do that, and I'll talk on that a little bit more. and then some brief comments in terms of audit logistics over on the right-hand side. Page 35 of the pack starts to go through those significant risks in a little bit more detail. The first two risks we're able to rebut for yourselves due to the nature of the council's operations. And again, that's consistent with previous years and other authorities. Again, that helps manage the work we have to do in those areas. Page 36 onwards provides more detail around the risk we do deem to be significant, and the sort of testing approaches that we'll be going through in respect of each of those. Page 40 just reflects on one of the recommendation we made in last year's audit findings report. We've just sort of put that there as a bit of a sort of a stopper to know that we'll follow that up at year end when it comes to the accounts audit. That's when we're not saying it's behind, it's when we would expect to check that recommendation. The following pages then provide a bit more detail around our materiality calculation and how that plays through. Page 44 touches on our IT work, which largely will focus on the council's general ledger system, Aggresso, but I guess building on some of what's been said before, we do a sort of cyber security work plan to check where things are, and I guess if we have any concerns, we will flag that back to you as part of that. Obviously, that won't be as detailed as the work that internal audit will do, but it's just something we will acknowledge as well. Page 45 provides a summary as to where we are with our value for money conclusion. I think the key point at this stage is that we've identified no risk of significant weakness from the initial work we've done so far. That work will continue over the coming months. Obviously, we'll issue the auditor's annual report, hopefully alongside the audit findings report later in the year. Page 46 just sort of provides a brief outline of the year as it will flow through. In terms of, obviously, got the plan at this meeting. We'll have a brief update at the June meeting, and then once the next meeting is set after that, depending on elections, etc., we'll have our audit findings report and the auditor's annual report for the committee to consider. And then I guess the last couple of pages, so page 47 reflects on the fact this is whilst we've been your auditor for a number of years, this is the first year of the new PSA contract, which I think has seen an increase in fees, and also changes in the way that those fees are billed to the authority. So just a couple of pages there sort of pointing that out in terms of where that sits. And the last page I wanted to briefly touch on was page 49, which talks about an upcoming standard, IFRS 16, around leases, which its implementation date is the 1st of April 24. Obviously, it will have a financial impact on the 24-25 accounts. However, we believe there will be some need for some initial disclosures in this year's accounts, so we'll just have to bear those in mind as we go through our work on this year's accounts. So that was all I wanted to go through, Chair, in terms of sort of the key areas. Obviously, more than happy to take any questions that members may have on that.
Thank you, Matt. Lisa.
Matt, would you mind just giving a bit of an update on the how the plan has shifted this year a bit because of the backlog and the catch-up required for other audit clients, please?
Yes, of course. So, I mean, there is a little bit more in the pack about this, which I didn't necessarily mention it because I guess it doesn't directly. Well, in terms of yourself, you're actually on time and up to date, and obviously we're doing the 23-24 audit. I guess at the time we should be. Clearly, that's not the case in the broader sector. So I think what that has meant is that as a firm, we're looking at, I guess, delivering our 23-24 audits over a 6-month period. So that will be between July and December. I think what that will mean for yourselves, and we've had conversations with Lisa and Claire on this, is that your audit will probably be taking place slightly later than it would have been the case in previous years. However, we're certainly committing that the work is finished this side of Christmas. So I think we're working through an October to sort of December timeline for that work. I think that's largely sort of managing sort of our risk as a firm and those kind of things. But we're comfortable that we've got sufficient resource to deliver that within that window. I say, and Claire and Lisa are comfortable with that. So it will be slightly shift in terms of that broader time frame as to when you'll see our reports. But yeah, rest assured, it will. Yeah, we're very committed to making sure it happens this side of Christmas.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions? Anyone? Councillor Worcester.
Just a couple, if that's okay. Did we have a similar report a couple of months ago? And I have got very similar concerns with regards to the way that this report's laid out. I'm also more predominantly concerned with these extra questions that have come up from saying that those implications of timing. Lisa, does that give us any implications as a council for our work?
Yes and no. The audit process, or the statement of accounts, the preparation and the audit is a really long process. We have to get our draft statements done by the 31st of May, which we are still aiming to do, regardless of the fact that the audit will now is slightly delayed in the year. The concern for us, and we have discussed this with Matt as well, is the audit is then hanging over us for a really long time, but we are going to have a gap. So we are going to get as much of the working paper requests and audit samples that we can in advance of the audit team coming in on site. But last year we had quite a long audit period that just was never ending. So hopefully this one, although we've got the break, it really will be that this time, because the team won't be on site. As long as we can stick to that October-December timeline, we're comfortable with it this year, because we haven't really got much choice. So we will work as best we can around that. It means that we also hopefully haven't got to change an audit committee date, because the statements will come to the committee scheduled for the end of January. So it's what we've got to work with at the moment. We understand the limitations of the audit firms, but it's not ideal if we're not done before we need to be. We would like to be done by, so that we can then focus on other things, but we can work with it this year, and it's likely to be the same next year, I think.
So that's my concern, is that, as far as I remember, this audit is costing the council almost £100,000, isn't it?
It's gone up this year, Dolly, isn't it? 150. It's 176, isn't it?
I'm just going to compare it to other contracts that the council hold, that if, for instance, in our waste contract, we hold financial clauses where if outside firms don't actually hit what they've been contracted to do with the council, we can start looking at recouping some of the financial cost that comes with the fact that if our audit is late, it can't be late. So we have to then look at, we've got staffing implications, we've got resourcing implications. And to be honest with you, does this come down to the fact that we've got very few firms that we can contact for this work nationally?
It's all part of the scarcity of audit. I mean, audit and auditors. Kathy is slightly in the same boat with gaps in her structure as well. But we are contractually obliged to pay these prices now. We joined the PSAA contract. Audit partners, key audit partners, are very limited. So those are firms that can do local government audits. It's quite a small pool. But that's what we've signed up to, and they are meeting the deadlines that the government has set. So at the moment there isn't a non-delivery aspect to the plan that we're working to.
So just to ask, because I think it's a fair question, in future, if we know that these issues are going to be coming up, is there a space for the contract to be re-looked at? Does it need, for instance, I don't know, a working group to work through the issues that are associated with this, so that officers don't feel that they are kind of doing this on their own, and make sure that they have members' backing and members' understanding of this sort of thing? Because, for instance, from the outside, it will look like, if we don't hit our deadlines, that we have somehow fallen down, and this doesn't sound like it will be that situation, but I can see the risk here, if that makes sense. Can I just go on to the questions really quick, the actual questions I've got on the report? Is that okay?
Yeah, do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, if that's okay. It's a lot of questions, apologies.
Otherwise I'll forget the first question. I don't think it warrants a working group, Dolly. I think that that working groups, focus should be elsewhere. This is something that we can bring to this committee, which is essentially the working group that would back us with challenging the auditors. But I think we need to cross that bridge when we come to it. At the moment, we're comfortable with what we've got. Obviously, none of us are happy with the prices that we've got to pay. That's no secret. Matt knows how I feel about that as well. But it's what we've signed up to. It's what the market is dictating, and the way that audit has changed and the framework that they have to operate within. This is now reflecting the complexity of local government audit.
Lovely. Chair, I'm aware that I'm taking up majority of time, so I do apologise. Can I ask a couple of questions based on the report? Thank you. So, when you were going through your summary, the first thing that particularly struck me, and it has struck me for a little while, is that you look at our kind of assets, building assets, as to what they're kind of doing, that we rely on those building valuations. I know from one of the buildings in my ward that, for instance, what it looks like on paper isn't actually what that building is worth because it's got massive fire damage. I'm wondering, have we got correct procedures in place to actually look at the realistic viewpoint of this? So, for instance, if those assets have to be realised for some very horrible, strange reason for the council, that we haven't kind of got inflated figures as opposed to what our realistic figures for these assets.
Yeah, Matt, I'm going to answer this if that's all right. The risks that have been highlighted here are the risks that we have every year, and they are the industry risks. That every authority has these risks. Our property portfolio is relatively small compared to a lot of authorities, but it's still a big number on our balance sheet. The balance sheet values are not necessarily the sale values. Now, if we have got a fire damaged property, I would have hoped that would have been reflected in the valuation and there would be an impairment that it reflects that. So we will need to check that out, Dolly. Wish you'd have asked me not in this meeting. Never mind. But if we ever to realise a building, we would get a sale valuation done at time. The book values for some of our buildings are not the sale value. They're very different. The value in use is not the same thing as what our sale value would be, and that's one of the issues that we have with the focus that the auditors are forced to looking into. These numbers in our balance sheet actually don't mean a lot because they are not the value that we're going to be using to sell something if we have to, and the chances of selling some of ours, is very slim. But it's on our balance sheet, so they have to put the effort in to investigate it as if we were a private sector company, whereas in reality the numbers around our properties are reversed out, some of the valuations and the revaluation, so it doesn't impact on our ability to run as a local authority. So the valuations are not meaningless, although those that have just been at the pension, it's the same thing for the pension numbers, they are pretty meaningless, the ones that are on the balance sheet. But it's the accounting technicalities that we have to go through that they have to get audited for. So as long as we value them correctly for the statements, and then if we were to sell them, we would get a book valuation or a market valuation for the sale of that. So they're two very separate things, so please don't worry about that.
Next question. On page 46, I don't really see the value in having members of the audit team individually labelled from any particular company. I feel that's an absolute waste. And it does make me think that actually it's an absolute waste it being there, because any of these people could give their 1 month's notice and then not be there. This is creating like a false sense. If anybody was going to look at this report, it has to be based on the facts and figures. And for instance, I'm sure all these people are absolutely lovely, but it's a total deflection of what this report is about. For instance, what I would expect and would assume as a member is that it really doesn't matter which member of the outside company is part of our team. I would expect the work to be accomplished whoever is there. So I don't particularly like to see that reflected in the report because it makes it look like a business plan as opposed to a report. So that's a personal opinion that I don't particularly like, and I will bring back the...
Can I comment on that one?
Of course.
I have to disagree with you because I think this is really useful. The audit team worked really closely with the finance team for a very long time. They come to this committee not just as part of the final accounts audit, but now for the prep. So Matt's here. Ibby has replaced Richmond, who was our audit manager last year, so that we've got a new member of the team, which it's a shame she's on leave today, because otherwise we would have introduced her to you. But I think knowing who they are and their presence in this audit committee is really quite important. So I think for us, it's useful to have it, and they do come to this committee, so I think it is useful for you to be able to put names to faces.
I think my point mostly sits around the fact that it does create a false sense of security that these people are always going to be there, and actually whether they're there or whether they're not, I would still expect an external company to provide exactly the same support for SWAL, whether it was Jim or Debbie or whoever. I agree, it's lovely to see people face to face and have them highlighted with their good work, absolutely. But for the purposes of having a document that we kind of rely on all year round and may come back to, it feels slightly that's the focus on that page rather than the actual information, which is more the key points, in my opinion. And I think when this document came the last time, we had a look at the way that the information was relayed to residents, and I will just say again that I prefer to see something with RAG rating or some actual evidence of how things are getting on. So for instance, when we've got 3 pages, two pages of a list with dots next to it, I think that could be re-looked at in its formatting, and there could be more valuable information put into that report, because it's really interesting stuff for me, and I think it's really important that members have lots of information, and that all the pages should be really useful. And if that's not use, if it's just there for looks, then maybe we could have made that report maybe 5 or 6 pages shorter. But that's just a personal look thing for me. Thank you.
Which pages were they, Dolly?
So page 52 and page 53, and it could just be the way that I read it. I don't particularly like to see turquoise dots used as a colour on reports, because it has no bearing in terms of importance or priority or anything like that. We're used to seeing things like on the other report, which is red, yellow, black, green, is the normal things. Even for instance, you know, are we really looking at the best way to present the information? I didn't like it on the last report. It's a personal thing. I don't feel it serves its use here. Thank you.
I think the last report, the dots were a bit like a RAG rating, but they weren't RAG. They were different shades of blue, which is the point I think you raised last time. This one is just identifying where the source of those communication plans is, whether it's in the audit plan or in the audit findings report. I think it's probably unfortunate, Matt, that it's the same colours that were used, or one of the same colours that we've used before. So it's potentially something that we can look at, but it's not a grading chart. It is literally where you will find that information.
No, that's my point, is that it's lovely for a grading chart, but for instance, I just think that's 2 pages where, for instance, it could be a grading chart, or for instance, could that have been a much smaller portion of the document where more useful information is put in there, if you see what I mean. So for me, it looks lovely, the report, but it looks like a business plan. And actually what I want to see is reports coming to council that are absolutely jam-packed with really useful information regarding what the report is based on. For me, the points I've pointed out tonight are personal. I'm not saying that, for instance, everyone's going to agree, but for me, I don't particularly like council work to be full of nice pictures with slick-looking things. I want it to be absolutely every bit of information that I can then go back to residents and say, this report is something that is chock full of everything you're going to need to understand this, and we can help you understand it. So those points are just personal. Thank you.
Okay, but I think this isn't a report, this is a plan. So the fact that it looks like a business plan is kind of a little bit helpful, because this is the intention of it. It is setting out the plan for the year. It's not reporting on what they found. That will come next. So hopefully some of the points that have been raised in the feedback, Matt can take back to in our findings report, but this is exactly that. It is a plan. So that table is showing where the information will be reported when it comes back. So hopefully that's clarified the point, and we take note that it's not your personal preference.
Councillor North.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to make comment that I actually greatly appreciate the inclusion of the people and pictures behind this. I think it's always good to show the human side of this. This is not a faceless organization shoving numbers in our faces. These are people. And that's really all I wanted to say about that.
Thank you very much. The only thing I get when we come to these reports and whatever is that it's costing us more to have these things done, and we seem to be getting less and less value. You know, we hear it every year. Are these auditors audited themselves on their performance?
Yes, that is why our fees are now £176,000, because the regulators that regulate the firms are much, I'm going to say much more thorough, but that makes it sound like they weren't thorough before. They're focusing on things that are much more complex and much more technical, and so the costs to audit us have gone up, and that just gets passed to us. So, as I've already said, we don't like paying them, but until the whole audit framework gets overhauled, this is where we're at for the next 4 years. Is the contract, Matt? I think it's 4 years. I know I should know that.
Well, I think it's 5 years. 5 years, but yeah.
Yeah. So, and I just think I need to say that we need to focus on the outcomes of our audit reports, and the performance of the audit teams, which is what we should be being judged on, and it's that the performance of that stuff, and the what's the word I'm looking for? Preparation of the reports that we need the further discussion. So hopefully we can take on board the comments that have been made to improve the reports, but it's the content and the work and the, you know, the detail of the audits that we should be focusing on, and the outcomes and the findings.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree, at least, and I'd just, I mean, I will take all those points noted in terms of sort of style and that. I mean, some of the content is a lot of the content is prescribed per the standards, so that has to be in there. I mean, we have choice about how we present it, so we could certainly consider that. And I think in terms of sort of regulation, yeah, the firm is our key regulator is the Financial Reporting Council. All of the firms are reviewed annually, and there are reports available on the FRC website that would show where the firm is both at a broad level, i.e. all audit, and at a public sector level. I mean, if members want me to share links around afterwards, I'm happy to do that, but it's all there in the public domain in terms of our regulation.
Thank you, Matt. Oh, yes, sorry. I pressed my finger on it, not enough. Right, do members note the report? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I now close the meeting at 19:57, and all have a safe journey home if the traffic ain't as bad as it's been. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.